The two core member of the South Asian movement we're in the government delegation, and we can have one from Nepal. Mr. Manjit is here, and then we also had Chuki, who was working closely with the government, with Bhutanese government. So that's like a very good achievement for the South Asian movement itself.
Thank you.
We also have got few publications regarding the climate change, treating manual for the teachers, and then how to do the campaigning. So if you like to collect it, you have free.
Thanks so much. Can you hear me if I use this microphone? So we do have some time for questions. Our expert panelists were very good in keeping within time. So we've got some time for questions. I'm just going to ask you to use the mic that's in front of you, or if you're sitting in the seats behind, to step up to a microphone. If there aren't any, is there? Yeah. Yeah. So we've got two questions.
Thank you, Philip Potter from the University of Minnesota. I'm really impressed by this panel, and I'm encouraged when I see young people voting for environmental issues when they do vote. At the same time, I'm very discouraged when I see the patterns of older voters. What can youth do to engage older generations to care about the environment before they do a lot of damage on the way out? Thank you.
Yeah, I think I can address that question. I think it's really important for youth to set an example. And I think in Guam at least, it was a question of raising the youth vote. But I think if older people see that youth are excited about voting, and it was strange because our campaign was targeted towards young people, but we had a lot of older people come up to us, wanted to know how to get involved. They saw this crazy tricycle and some college students running around in cool t-shirts, and they wanted to know what we were up to. So I think it's about having enthusiasm for something that isn't usually framed in a way that's fun. And I think everyone, regardless of age, has that youthful fun, and they want to have that in things that are sort of bland, like going to a town office. Sometimes people don't even know where you do vote, and so making it really accessible, really transparent, really helps everyone try to get involved.
Hi, Carolina from World Scout Organization Movement. I just want to ask you how you manage the fact that you were involved with politics and the project, because sometimes politicians want to sell from that, and if they have the youth sector in their politics, they think they will sell more, but how do you get involved not to sell the project to one specific party?
So I'm just going to answer this as a member of Energy Action Coalition. We've run a lot of different national campaigns, one including Power Vote. And I think that's a really great question, because that's a balance that I know the youth climate movement within the United States has to balance, and that's the lessons that we learned with the recent elections. So now the Republicans are holding our Congress, and we have a huge bunch of people who are denying climate change. But unfortunately, the youth climate sector on a general basis has been very connected to the Democratic Party. And what we're going to have to do to expand that voice is to really go back to that nonpartisan framework, which we already were moving in, but oftentimes because we have one party that is highly funded by dirty industry, highly funded by industries that are creating climate change, it's hard sometimes to mobilize on that side. But one of the big things that we see, regardless of that, is that people in general want to know how can they save money. People in general want to know how can they make sure that their families are safe and that their economic security is safe. And that's a big piece that on a national forefront, young people are going to have to take the lead in and pull the reins in, and showcasing that moving towards a renewable energy future doesn't necessarily mean that you have to even believe in climate change. It means that you have to believe in your country.
So I had here first, and then
Hi, I'm Ricardo Abdor. I'm from Nicaragua. I belong to a social business called Countryside Vote. Do you hear me well? Yes. Okay. I'm really impressed about you guys and the motivations you have, especially at your own, young age. It's really nice to see that you guys are setting an example. Like, for example, you cycling all over almost half a continent, right? That's amazing, and that's the kind of initiatives we need. I see that you guys are focusing a lot on both. I think that's very important. But I think one of the most crucial issues with climate change is the consumption or consumerism of the people in general, especially in the United States. And I think it's very important to create a campaign also to tell youngsters that consuming so much is not that good. It's not that good for the environment. It won't make them happier. It's just silly, right? Because you have all the media like consume. But we need to create like pressure there. I don't know if you have thought something about that. Thank you.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there, and I mean, just doing a bike trip is like a great metaphor for that, because for 3 months you're only living off what you can put into 4 panniers, so you can really learn how to be happy with less. And I think that there are studies that come out saying that we're no happier now than we were in the 1950s when we didn't have flat screen TVs and multiple large cars. So, and yeah, I think that's a challenge, and people have to sort of learn to make not necessarily a lower standard of living, but a standard of living that relies less on material, more on friendships and relationships and having fun outside. That's my belief.
Did anyone else want to comment on that? Sorry.
For a lot of our communities, and we speak about this a lot, is that consumerism is something that has been, and materialism is something that's oftentimes marketed towards us. But if you're poor, you can't consume as much. And so we hope to, as part of Youth for Climate Justice, engage in making sure that people, especially our communities, see that it's okay to consume less, and that we don't have to necessarily buy into this materialistic idea of buying Jordans every 5 weeks for $150 that are made by some child that's probably directly related to us in some way in a developing country. And so that's a big piece of how we see building for climate justice is tackling head-on materialism.
There was a question behind you.
Hello, my name is Jorge from the University of Queensland in Australia, and congratulations for all the panel. It's really, really inspiring to see all these actions that sometimes many people have the intention to do it, but they don't concrete any action. So congratulations for everyone. Now my question is, if you would have the opportunity to be the leaders right now in the conference, and you would have the opportunity to sign an agreement that could, decide the targets for save the world and put stop to the issue of climate change, what would you sign? What would be the agreement? And my question goes with the fact that sometimes it's really easy for us to criticize all the leaders over there, that for them they have many other agendas protecting economies' interests for their own nations, the kind of lifestyles that you like youngs in Canada, US, Europe have, and we do not have in Latin America or Africa, Asia. So what would you sign on the table right here, right now?
That's a hard question. And I think it's something that everyone right now is struggling with. But I think just looking at so far the activity of Youngo, I think is a good way to start. All the policy groups here have been working on statements and trying to build a consensus from different opinions, whether it's national interests or personal interests, and coming together on those conclusions is a really powerful point. But I also think that young people have something that maybe our delegates don't, and it's we understand that there's a global citizenship versus just looking at our national interests. And so because right now we're making bonds with other young people from different countries, we're able to see how much we have and in common. And so we're not necessarily thinking about boundaries so much as we're just thinking about how other people are experiencing climate change. And so for me, that's very helpful that we are coming together on certain issues because we understand things that maybe our national leaders don't.
Does anyone else want to comment on this?
The grassroots should be leading the conversation. So if there was an agreement today, I would hope that it would be something that the people most impacted were the ones that helped to define and create that, not the people who are the people who are creating the biggest problems. And by that I mean huge intergovernmental agencies that are directly causing climate change. And we hope that they take the lead of those who are most impacted by climate change.
Oh, sorry. Yes, please. Yeah. I also want to add to the part of what she said. It's just we'd like to focus everyone to focus on all the vulnerable groups and marginalized groups like indigenous groups, and then also focus on gender as well. And think of cutting down on emissions and focusing on something which is a commitment which is accountable and transparent, which is verifiable, and a commitment which is stronger, which is done right now.
And I would also add, I know there are a lot of people arguing that the science needs to conform to the politics, so that, and it's talking about realism, and what I would say to that, and in terms of what kind of deal I would sign, is that we need to have the politics conform to the science, because if we are only going to cut our emissions halfway, then that means that we're going to hit a point where we start having the positive feedback loops kicking in and climate change goes beyond our control, then